Imagine stepping outside on a warm summer morning, coffee in hand, and instead of seeing empty pots, dried out soil, or plants that barely survived the season, you see life. Full, overflowing containers. Soft greens spilling over the edges. Blooms rising at different heights, creating layers of color that look like they were carefully designed, even if you didn't spend much time at all. And here's the part that surprises most people. You didn't spend hours maintaining it. You didn't replace plants halfway through the season. You didn't constantly water, trim, or fix problems. In fact, most of these plants have been quietly doing the work on their own. Now, let me ask you something. Have you ever planted something in a pot, felt excited for a few weeks, and then watched it slowly decline? Leaves turning yellow, soil drying out faster than you expected, blooms fading, and never really coming back. So what do most people do? They assume container gardening is high maintenance. They assume it takes constant effort. And, eventually, they give up on it altogether. But here's what they're not telling you. The problem isn't container gardening. The problem is the plant choices. Because while some plants struggle in pots, others are built for it. They stay compact. They adapt quickly. They bounce back from stress. And once they're established, they require almost nothing to keep going. Here's the truth. Most nurseries won't say out loud. A lot of the plants they sell are designed for short-term impact. They look good when you buy them, but they're not built to last in containers without constant care, which means you come back. You buy more. You repeat the cycle. But there's a small group of gardeners who do things differently. They choose perennials that thrive in pots, not just survive. Thrive. These are plants that come back year after year, spread slowly and fill their containers, handle inconsistent watering better than most, and still look good without constant attention. So instead of replanting every season, they build containers that improve over time. And that's exactly what we're doing today. I'm going to show you 17 lazy perennials that thrive in pots, plants that are perfect for container gardening if you want maximum results with minimum effort. These are the kinds of plants that make people stop and ask, wait, how do your pots always look so full? And I'll also show you one plant on this list, just one that most people completely overlook. But once you plant it, it changes how you think about container gardening entirely. Now, before we jump in, I want to know something from you. Where are you growing? Drop your state or your growing zone in the comments. Because container gardening gives you flexibility, but choosing the right plant for your climate still matters. And as we go through this list, I'll point out which plants perform best in different conditions so you can make smarter choices from the start. Also, be honest for a second. Have you ever had a pot that looked amazing for a few weeks and then just slowly gave up on you? You're not alone. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why that happens and how to avoid it completely. All right. Let's start with one of the most reliable low-effort perennials you can put in a container. This is the kind of plant that doesn't demand attention, but quietly delivers results season after season. And once you see how it grows, you'll wonder why you didn't plant it sooner. Number 1. Hosta. Now, if you've ever struggled with containers in shaded areas, patios, porches, or spots that barely get sunlight, this is where everything changes. Because most flowering plants fail there. They stretch, weaken, and eventually give up. But hostas, they thrive. Large, textured leaves, deep greens, soft blues, even variegated patterns with white or yellow edges. They don't need flowers to stand out. They create presence. And in a container, that presence feels full, almost lush without trying. Here's the real value. If you've ever had a pot that looked empty no matter what you planted, this is your solution. Hostas expand slowly but steadily. Each season they come back bigger. Vida, fulla. So instead of replanting, you upgrade the same container over time. Bonus. They're extremely low maintenance. Water them, give them shade, and they handle the rest. Now here's the expert move most people miss. Divide them every few years. Once a hosta gets large, you can split it into multiple plants and replant them into new containers. So one plant becomes 2, then 4, then more. That's how lazy gardening turns into smart scaling. You're not spending more. You're multiplying what already works. And this ties directly back to the bigger idea. The goal isn't to keep buying new plants. It's to choose plants that improve over time. Now here's something subtle but powerful. Hostas create structure. They anchor your containers. When you combine them with trailing plants or seasonal bloomers, they act as the base layer that keeps everything looking full, even when other plants cycle in and out. That's how you get containers that always look finished. Not just for a few weeks, but for the entire season. And again, timing matters. Planting in early spring gives hostas time to establish roots before heat stress kicks in. Miss that window, and they spend the season catching up. Hit it right, and they dominate the container effortlessly. Now the next plant on this list does something completely different. Instead of filling space with large leaves, it spills. It flows over the edges, and it creates that overflowing pot look that instantly makes a container feel expensive, even if it wasn't. Number 2, sedum stonecrop. Now this is where container gardening starts to feel almost unfair, in a good way, because sedum is one of those plants that thrives on neglect. Forget to water it. It's fine. Hot sun all day. It prefers it. Poor soil. It barely notices. And that's exactly why it works so well in pots. Visually, sedum brings something different. Thick, fleshy leaves that store water. Low-growing varieties that spread outward. Trailing types that spill over the edges of containers like a soft green waterfall. And upright varieties that add structure and even late-season blooms. Now here's the problem it solves. If you've ever had pots dry out too quickly, or struggled to keep up with watering, sedum is your answer, because it's built to survive drought, which means instead of constantly checking soil, you relax. Now here's the bonus value. Sedum doesn't just survive, it slowly spreads and fills the container. So over time, your pot goes from just planted to full, balanced, complete, without extra work. And here's the expert tip. Use well-draining soil. That's it. Don't overwater. Don't overthink it. Give it drainage, and it will do the rest. Now here's the mindset shift. Sedum is not just a plant. It's insurance. It protects your containers from failure, because even when other plants struggle, this one keeps going. And that consistency is what makes your setup look reliable. Now imagine combining sedum with something like hosta from earlier. One fills space in shade, one thrives in sun. Now you're building flexibility into your system. That's how smart container gardeners think. Not just what looks good, but what keeps working no matter what. Now the next plant takes this idea even further, because it doesn't just tolerate containers. It practically lives in them, and once you plant it, you'll start seeing it everywhere. Number 3. Heuchera coral bells. Now this is where your containers stop looking basic and start looking designed, because Heuchera isn't just a plant you add for growth. It's a plant you add for color without relying on flowers. Deep burgundy, lime green, amber purple, almost black tones. Even in low light it stands out. And in a pot, that contrast makes everything around it look better. Now here's the problem it solves. Have you ever had a container that just looked flat? Everything the same shade of green, nothing really catching the eye. Heuchera fixes that instantly. It adds contrast, depth, and a sense of layering that most people don't even realize they're missing. Now here's the bonus value. It holds its color for most of the year, not just a short bloom window. So even when other plants fade, your container still looks intentional. Still looks full, still looks finished. Now, let's talk about maintenance. This is where it gets interesting. Heuchera is incredibly low effort. It prefers partial shade but can handle sun in cooler climates. It doesn't need constant watering, and once it's established, it just sits there and performs. Quietly, consistently. Now, here's the expert tip. Good drainage is everything. If the roots stay too wet, that's when problems start. But get the drainage right, and this plant becomes almost effortless. Now here's something most people overlook. Heuchera is a perfect bridge plant. It connects different textures and colors in a container. Pair it with hosta, now you have contrast in both size and color. Pair it with sedum, now you have contrast in texture. This is how simple pots turn into layered compositions, without adding more work. Now zoom out for a second. Look at what you already have. A shade anchor hosta, a drought-proof filler sedum, a color contrast layer heuchera. That's already a system. Not random plants, but roles. Each one doing something specific. And once you start thinking like this, container gardening becomes simple, predictable, repeatable. Now the next plant on this list changes the game again, because it doesn't just sit in the pot, it spills, it softens edges, and it gives you that cascading effect that makes containers look twice as full. Number 4, Creeping Jenny Lysamacia, Numularia. Now this is where your containers start getting attention, because Creeping Jenny doesn't just grow, it flows. Bright chartreuse leaves that spill over the edges of your pot like liquid color. In sunlight, it almost glows, and in containers that trailing effect instantly makes everything feel fuller, softer, and more alive. This is the plant that gives you that professional look, without doing anything complicated. Now let's talk about the problem it solves. Have you ever had a container that looked too rigid, too upright, everything growing straight up with no movement? Creeping Jenny fixes that immediately. It breaks hard edges, it softens the container, and it creates that cascading effect that makes a pot feel twice as full. Now here's the bonus value. It grows fast, faster than most trailing plants. So instead of waiting weeks or months for that overflow look, you start seeing it early in the season. And once it gets going, it keeps expanding. Now here's the expert tip. Keep the soil slightly moist. Unlike sedum, this plant actually enjoys consistent moisture, not soaking wet, but don't let it dry out completely for long periods. Get that balance right, and it rewards you with aggressive, healthy growth. Now, here's something most people don't realize. Creeping Jenny also acts as a visual connector. When you combine it with upright plants like hostas or heuchera, it ties everything together. Top layer, mid layer, spill layer. Now your container has depth. And depth is what makes it look expensive. Now zoom out again. Look at what you've built so far. Structure hosta, durability sedum, color contrast heuchera, movement Creeping Jenny. That's not random anymore. That's a system. And here's the key. Once you understand roles, you stop guessing. You start building containers that always work. Now, the next plant on this list adds something different again. Not just structure, not just spill, but softness, movement with texture. And once you see it in a container, you'll understand why it's used in high-end landscape design. Number 5, ornamental grass dwarf varieties. Now this is where your containers start to feel alive. Because ornamental grasses don't just grow, they move. Every breeze, every shift in air creates motion. Soft flowing blades that sway gently, catching light in a way most plants can't. And in a container, that movement changes everything. It turns something static into something dynamic. Now here's the problem it solves. Have you ever had a pot that felt stiff, too structured, like everything was just sitting there with no life? Ornamental grasses fix that instantly. They add motion, they add softness, and they break that rigid planted look. Now here's the bonus value. Most dwarf ornamental grasses are extremely low maintenance. They don't need constant pruning. They don't require perfect watering. And many of them tolerate heat, wind, and even some neglect, which makes them perfect for containers. Now here's the expert tip. Choose compact varieties. Not all grasses are container-friendly. Look for dwarf or slow-growing types like blue fescue or dwarf fountain grass. These stay controlled, while still giving you that movement effect. Now here's something most people overlook. Ornamental grass is a contrast engine. When you pair it with broadleaf plants like hosta, the difference in texture makes both plants stand out more. Wide leaves, thin blades, still versus movement. That contrast is what makes containers look designed instead of random. Now step back again. Your system is getting stronger. Structure hosta, durability sedum, color heuchera, spill Creeping Jenny, movement ornamental grass. Every new plant isn't replacing the last one. It's adding a function, and that's why everything starts working together. Now, the next plant on this list adds something people always chase, but rarely achieve in containers. Consistent blooms, color that keeps coming back, and a plant that doesn't give up after one short show. Number 6. Geranium hardy. Geranium cranesbill. Now this is where most people finally feel like their containers are working. Because hardy geraniums bring something that's hard to maintain in pots, reliable repeating color. Not a one-time bloom, not a quick burst and then nothing, but waves of soft, natural-looking flowers that keep coming back. Pinks, purples, blues, subtle tones that blend easily with everything else. Nothing too loud, nothing too artificial. Just steady, consistent beauty. Now, here's the problem it solves. Have you ever had a flowering plant in a pot that looked amazing for about 2 weeks, and then it just stopped? That's the frustration most people deal with. Geraniums fix that. They bloom, they rest, and then they bloom again. So your container never feels empty. Now here's the bonus value. They spread gently, not aggressively like ground covers, but enough to fill gaps over time, which means your pot becomes fuller each season without replanting. Now here's the expert tip. Trim lightly after the first bloom. Just a quick cutback. That simple step encourages a second wave of flowers. And this is where most people miss out. They let the plant finish, and then wonder why it doesn't come back strong. Small action, big difference. Now let's talk conditions. Hardy geraniums are incredibly adaptable. Full sun to partial shade, average watering, nothing complicated, which makes them perfect for low-maintenance containers. Now here's something subtle but powerful. Geraniums soften everything. They blend transitions between bold plants like hosta and structured plants like ornamental grass. They remove harsh edges. They make everything feel connected. Now zoom out again. Look at what you've built. Structure, durability, color, contrast, spill movement, and now repeating blooms. This is no longer just container gardening. This is a system that keeps performing. And here's the key insight. The more roles you cover, the less work you do, because every plant is solving a problem for you. Now, the next plant on this list goes even further, because it doesn't just bloom, it thrives under pressure, heat, Sunday neglect, and still keeps producing color. Number 7. Lavender. Now this is where your containers start doing more than just looking good, because lavender doesn't just add color, it adds fragrance, and that changes how your space feels. Step outside, brush past the leaves, and you get that soft, calming scent that instantly makes the area feel more relaxing, more intentional. This is the kind of plant that turns a patio into an experience. Now here's the problem it solves. Have you ever had containers that looked fine, but didn't feel special? Nothing memorable. Nothing that made you want to sit there longer. Lavender fixes that. It adds a sensory layer, not just visual, but smell, atmosphere, mood. Now here's the bonus value. It thrives in tough conditions. Full sun, dry soil, heat. In fact, the less you overcare for it, the better it performs, which makes it perfect for lazy gardening. Now, here's the expert tip. Do not overwater. This is where most people go wrong. Lavender hates vetroots. So use well-draining soil and let it dry slightly between watering. Get this right, and it becomes one of the easiest plants you own. Now here's something powerful. Lavender also attracts pollinators. Bees, butterflies, life. So your containers don't just sit there. They become active, dynamic. Now step back again. You now have structured durability, color, spill, movement, blooms. And now, fragrance. That's a full sensory system. And that's why your containers start standing out. Not because you added more work, but because you chose smarter plants. Now the next plant on this list does something different again, because it thrives in the exact opposite condition. Shade, cool areas, and places where most flowering plants. Number 8. Ferns, Boston fern, Japanese painted fern. Now this is where your shaded containers stop struggling and start thriving. Because ferns are built for low light, soft, feathery fronds, layered textures that spread outward and downward. And in a container, they create that rich, full look that most shade plants fail to deliver. Now here's the problem it solves. Have you ever had a shady corner where nothing seemed to work? Plants get leggy. Growth becomes thin. Everything looks weak. Ferns fix that. They don't fight the shade. They use it. They fill space naturally, creating volume without needing flowers. Now here's the bonus value. They grow dense, which means your container never looks empty. Even without blooms, it still feels lush. Now here's the expert tip. Keep the soil consistently moist. Ferns don't like to dry out completely, but you don't need to overwater either. Just steady moisture, and they'll reward you with constant growth. Now here's something powerful. Ferns create softness. When you combine them with structured plants, they remove that rigid look. They add flow, balance, and that natural, effortless feel. Now zoom out again. You now have sun solutions, shade solutions, structure movement, color fragrance. This is no longer guesswork. This is a complete system. Now, the next plant on this list adds something people always want in containers, but rarely get right. Bold color that lasts, and a plant that thrives even when conditions aren't perfect. Number 9, Coreopsis. Now this is where your containers finally start to feel bright, because Coreopsis brings something simple, but powerful. Clear, vibrant color that keeps showing up. Yellows, golds, sometimes soft, reds, clean tones that instantly lift the entire container. Not complicated, not overly dramatic. Just consistent, reliable brightness. Now here's the problem it solves. Have you ever had a container that looked dull over time? Even if the plants were healthy, it just didn't pop anymore. Coreopsis fixes that. It keeps producing flowers over a long period. So instead of a short bloom window, you get ongoing color. Now here's the bonus value. It's tough, heat fine, sun perfect, average soil, no problem, which means you don't have to babysit it. Now here's the expert tip. Deadhead occasionally. Just remove spent flowers. This signals the plant to keep producing more. Small effort, continuous reward. Now here's something subtle. Coreopsis adds energy to your container. When paired with softer plants like ferns or lavender, it creates contrast. Calm versus vibrant, soft versus bright. And that balance is what makes a container visually interesting. Now step back again. Your system now includes structure, durability, color contrast, spill movement, blooms, fragrance, shade coverage, and now, long-lasting brightness. At this point, your containers aren't just surviving, they're performing, and they're doing it with less effort than most people expect. Now, the next plant on this list does something different again, because it doesn't just add color, it adds height, and that changes the entire composition of your container. Number 10, Salvia. Now, this is where your containers gain presence, because salvia doesn't just add color, it adds vertical impact. Tall flower spikes that rise above the rest of the container. Blues, purples, sometimes reds, strong, clean colors that draw the eye upward. And this is important, because without height, most containers look flat. Now here's the problem it solves. Have you ever had a pot that felt low, compressed, like everything was sitting at the same level? Salvia fixes that instantly. It creates height variation. It gives your container structure from bottom to top. Now here's the bonus value. It blooms for a long time. And even better, it attracts pollinators like crazy. Bees, butterflies, constant activity. So your container doesn't just look good, it feels alive. Now here's the expert tip. Cut it back after the first bloom. This encourages a second flush of flowers. Most people skip this and miss out on half the performance. Now here's something powerful. Salvia acts as a focal point. It gives your eye somewhere to land. So when you combine it with trailing plants and fillers, everything suddenly feels intentional, balanced, complete. Now zoom out again. Your system now includes foundation spill movement, color texture, shade solutions, sun solutions, and now, vertical height. This is how simple pots become layered designs, without complexity, without extra work. Now, the next plant on this list might be the most underrated of all, because it doesn't just perform well, it quietly multiplies your entire setup. Number 11. Mint-controlled container growing. Now, this is the plant most people misunderstand, because in a garden bed, mint can take over. But in a container, it becomes one of the easiest, most productive, and most useful plants you can grow. Fresh green leaves, fast growth, constant harvest, and a scent that instantly makes your space feel alive. Now here's the problem it solves. Have you ever wanted something in your containers that wasn't just decorative, but actually useful? Mint gives you that. Tea, cooking, fresh garnish. It's a plant you don't just look at, you use it. Now, here's the bonus value. It grows aggressively, which in a container is exactly what you want. It fills space fast. It recovers quickly after trimming, and it keeps producing all season. Now, here's the expert tip. Keep it contained. Never plant mint directly in the ground unless you want it to spread everywhere. But in a pot, it becomes controlled, manageable, perfect. Now, here's the final insight. Mint represents something bigger. You're not just building containers that look good. You're building containers that give back. Now, step back and look at everything you've built. Structure, spill, movement, color, texture, fragrance, shade solutions, sun solutions, height, and now, function. This isn't random planting. This is a system, a low-maintenance system that improves over time. Now, here's the truth. Container gardening doesn't have to be hard. It only feels hard when the plants are working against you. But when you choose the right perennials, everything changes. Less work, better results, more consistency. So here's what I want to know. Which of these plants are you starting with? And what does your space look like right now? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. And if this helped you see container gardening differently, make sure you subscribe. Because once you understand the system, you'll never go back to guessing again.